America is not negotiating with Iran in Islamabad. It is negotiating with whatever survives after Moscow hears Iran. That's real terms first. That is the story. The photographs from Pakistan are doing what dramatic images always do. They pull the eye toward the runway, the escort jets, the handshakes, the military theater. The suggestion that something decisive is about to happen. But the real event is not the landing in Pakistan. The real event is the order of listening. Pakistan hears Iran as a mediator. Russia hears Iran as a partner. Those are not the same conversation. Iran as foreign minister made the sequence plain enough. Pakistan, Oman, Moscow, and that means the last major power to hear Tehran's actual position before a final negotiating shape emerges is the one country that can help Iran endure if the talks fail, redesign the uranium file if the talks bend, and block the diplomatic costs if the talks drag. That is not routine diplomacy. That is pre-negotiation power. Most coverage is still trapped at the surface level. Is Iran serious? Is America serious? Will talks happen? Is a ceasefire real? Those are valid questions, but they are still second-order questions. The first-order question is simpler and more dangerous. When Russia hears Iran's private terms before America does, what exactly is America arriving to negotiate? I think the answer is uncomfortable. America is not negotiating against Iran's raw position. It is negotiating against a position that has already been filtered through Russian support, Russian incentives, Russian alternatives, and Russian tolerance for continued conflict. That is why the Moscow stop matters more than the Islamabad headlines. Publicly, Iran's terms are familiar. Sovereignty in Hormuz cannot be erased. Uranium enrichment cannot be treated like a right to be surrendered forever. No real deal exists under full pressure conditions. Fine. Everyone knows that script, but public terms are not the real terms. The real terms live underneath them. Every serious government has two positions in negotiation. The public one is for signaling. The private one is for survival. The public one says what cannot be accepted. The private one measures what actually could be accepted if the language guarantees sequencing and pace. Saving mechanisms are good enough. That is the layer Russia gets first. Not because Russia is smarter, because Iran chose Russia first, and that choice sits on top of a structure that has already been built. Iran and Russia signed a 20-year strategic partnership treaty in January 2026, not symbolism structure, financial cooperation, political coordination, security ties, technology channels, mechanisms designed to reduce the force of Western sanctions. Then came a scheduled consultations program running through 2028 between the two foreign ministries. Again, not improvisation structure. So when Tehran turns toward Moscow in the middle of a war, it is not reaching for help in panic. It is stepping onto rails laid down before the war began. That matters because structured partnerships do something ad hoc. Diplomacy cannot. They shorten the distance between what one side needs and what the other side can quickly provide. Russia does not need months to understand how to position itself. It already has the relationship, the institutional lane, and the incentive is obvious. High oil prices help Russia. A diplomatic role helps Russia. Custody over Iran's uranium would help Russia even more. A post-war settlement in which Washington can claim de-escalation while Moscow controls the most sensitive nuclear legacy file would be a geopolitical gift. That brings us to the center of the whole thing, the uranium question. America wants the nuclear problem neutralized on terms it can describe as a success. Russia has publicly offered an alternative formula, put the uranium under Russian custody on paper. That sounds like a technical workaround. In reality, it is a struggle over who owns the architecture of the settlement. If Washington gets its way, America shapes the core security outcome. If Moscow gets its way, Russia becomes the indispensable custodian between Iran and the West. Now, imagine what happens when Iran goes to Moscow before any final negotiating movement. Russia can hear exactly how far Tehran can bend on uranium. Not the slogan, the threshold. Would Iran accept custody abroad if sovereignty were preserved rhetorically? Would it accept Russian storage, Russian reprocessing, Russian supervision, Russian sequencing? What time frame can Tehran politically survive? What phrasing can it sell domestically without looking broken? Those details are gold because the side that hears the threshold first can build its offer just above it. That is the first listener advantage. It is not mystical, it is mechanical. Hear the real floor first, design around the real floor first, force everyone else to negotiate after the architecture already exists. This is why America's knowledge of the general Russia-Iran relationship does not solve the problem. Yes, Washington knows Moscow supports Tehran. Yes, Washington knows Russia floated a uranium solution. Yes, intelligence agencies know a lot about military assets, factional tensions, sanction evasion, and diplomatic coordination. But general awareness is not the same as private precision. Knowing Russia is involved is not the same as knowing what Iran whispered in the room. And that gap matters because Russia does not need to announce what it learns. It just needs to quietly alter what it is willing to offer, back delay, veto, store, or publicly endorse. America can then walk into Islamabad believing it understands the board while the board has already been tilted. There's also a harder layer here that people are not saying plainly enough. Russia is not just a diplomatic consultant. Reporting has indicated Moscow has provided Tehran with intelligence about American troop, ship, and aircraft locations during this conflict. That means Russia enters the consultation not just with political sympathy or economic interest, but with a clear map of America's pressure posture. Iran is not merely asking a partner for opinion. It is consulting a partner that can read both the diplomatic and military environment surrounding the negotiation. So if Tehran is deciding whether to bend or hold, Moscow is in a position to say something no mediator can say with the same weight you can hold. Or you can bend this far and no farther. That is an extraordinary influence point. History offers a useful warning in major crises. The side consulted first often shapes the outer boundaries of the eventual deal, even when another side gets the public credit. That happened in Cold War bargaining, in proxy theaters, and in oil shock diplomacy. The details differ, but the mechanism is consistent. Early consultation creates hidden architecture. Hidden architecture creates visible limits. Visible limits later get described as the negotiation itself. That is why I think so much commentary on Pakistan is backward. It treats Pakistan as the decisive stage. I think Pakistan is mostly the visible stage. The decisive shaping may happen earlier in Moscow, where Iran does not have to posture for a mediator and can instead test how much support exists for either compromise or endurance. From there, two broad futures open. The first is a Russia-shaped settlement. Iran tells Moscow its private floor. Moscow calibrates the uranium formula and the diplomatic framework to sit just above that floor. Pakistan mediates, America proposes, Iran modifies, a deal emerges that looks like diplomacy, but the load-bearing beams were fitted earlier by Russian consultation. America gets to say the crisis was managed. Iran gets to say it preserved dignity. Russia gets to sit quietly in the middle of the most sensitive clause and call that quiet centrality a victory. The second is a Russia-backed endurance path. Iran tells Moscow that current American terms are politically impossible. Moscow does not need to rescue Iran dramatically. It only needs to make continued resistance survivable, keep the uranium alternative on the table, keep diplomatic cover available, keep intelligence flowing, keep the sense alive in Tehran that no fatal isolation is coming. Then Islamabad produces process without breakthrough. America can say talks continue. Iran can say principles were defended. Russia keeps its leverage. China keeps taking discounted crude through the existing support system. Oil stays elevated. Time becomes the weapon in both paths. America has the same problem. It hears second. And hearing second changes everything because second is when you stop shaping the threshold and start reacting to it. To be fair, there is a coherent American response. Washington can argue that it already knows the broad outlines, that Russia's role is obvious, that trilateral workarounds sometimes serve everyone, that a Russia custody uranium solution, while ugly, could still be preferable to uncontrolled escalation. That is all reasonable, but it still does not erase the private information gap. America can model public positions. Russia can tailor itself to private flexibility. That is the difference. So here's what matters now. Watch the language after Moscow, not the atmospherics, the wording. If a new formula appears around uranium custody, navigation rights, settlement structure, or sanctions timing, that means Moscow was not ceremonial, it was constructive. Watch whether Washington names the Moscow asymmetry directly. If it does not, that may mean the problem is real, but politically inconvenient to acknowledge. And above all, watch the final uranium clause in any emerging framework if Russia appears there. Openly or implicitly, then the central architecture of the negotiation was not built in Islamabad. It was built before Islamabad by the power that got to listen first. That is the bigger story hiding under diplomatic travel updates. Iran is not just moving between capitals. It is choosing the order in which great powers are allowed to know the truth. Russia hears the partner version, America hears the mediated version, and the gap between those two conversations may be the single most important fact in this entire round of talks.